So the Minister of Climate Change and the Environment, Catherine McKenna, told me that if she doesn't get a deal with the provinces on a price on carbon, the government is prepared to impose a price on carbon. And they're probably going to stick to this old Stephen Harper targets on a price, which is about cutting 30% reductions by the year 2030 based on 2005 rates. But is a price on carbon, or a carbon tax to use the word, popular at all? To find out, I'm joined by David Coletto, the CEO of Abacus Data, and you did a poll on the word carbon tax. Yeah. What did you find?
Well, we use that word because sometimes when you do polling on carbon price, you don't get the visceral reaction that you get when you test a tax. And what we found was that not as many people as you might imagine are scared or opposed to the concept in principle. Only 31% across the country said outright they were opposed to the idea of imposing a carbon tax to reduce emissions and deal with climate change. 25% were outright in favor. So opposition is higher than support, but a big block of the rest of the country say, I might be willing to accept it. And so what this tells us, when we test on other taxes, right, aversion to taxes is high, no one wants to pay more. I think we've come to a place in our political discourse where people are at least open-minded about a carbon tax and the need for a carbon tax. But I think, so it gives the government runway, but I think a lot of what we learn is that some of the devils are going to be in the details of that, but at least there's not outright opposition in parts of the country that the Liberals care about.
Right, and 80% of the country has a price on carbon. It's not a tax, so there's a tax in British Columbia, $30 a ton, but then you've got the cap and trade system in places like Ontario and Quebec, and the Liberals don't use the word tax, which, as you say, is the hot button issue. But when you get into the details, then what would the warning signs be if indeed the government does have to impose a price on carbon?
Well, I think what we know from other research we've done is that, for example, one of the questions that opponents of this raise is, what's the impact going to be on the economy? And one of the reasons why we find that support is, or opposition at least, is not as high as we might expect is that so few Canadians think there's going to be any impact on the long-term economic situation, either in their province or at the national economy. And so if you don't feel there's going to be a harm done by it, you're going to be less likely to oppose it. That being said, we didn't ask about price point. We didn't ask about how do your provinces feel about it. So there's lots of challenges for the government in how they impose this, because we know from even market research, price is important. So,
well, if you ask, for example, in BC, where they have $30 a ton, and that adds 7 cents a litre on your gas, would you accept a 7 cent a litre increase on your price of gas for a price on carbon? That you might get a different answer. So I just always wonder about the level of comprehension about the full impact on a price on carbon versus the issue. Finally, what does this say? What does this challenge pose for the opposition party, specifically the Conservatives, who have always said we will not have a carbon tax?
Well, we know that 62% of Conservative voters, those who voted Conservative last time, oppose a carbon tax. So a majority of their base is with them. So on the one side, you have to speak to that base. You have to defend those interests. There's no other place for them to go, but you still need to be there with them. The challenge is a third of their supporters either favor or are open to a carbon tax. And we know from, again, research we did during the Harper years, there was a significant portion of their base who said, look, I want you to be a little more environmentally friendly. I want you to appear to care more about these issues. Don't be climate change deniers. And so on the one hand, they potentially have an issue that can wedge the electorate, force maybe division among some soft liberals in certain parts of the country. But they also are challenged with a branding question, which is, what does the new post-Harper Conservative Party look like? Is it going to continue to be the party that doesn't want to deal with climate change in a real way?
Which is what Patrick Brown in Ontario is talking about. All right, so there is runway for the Liberals if they do end up trying to impose a price on carbon. I suppose you're in the field, by the way, on the Brangelina thing?
Critically important question.
Yeah, well, we'll get the data maybe next week from David on the Brangelina.